The 1910 World Series between the Philadelphia Athletics and the Chicago Cubs. After missing out on the pennant in 1909, Frank Chance and the Cubs returned to the World Series for the fourth time in 5 years. They go into the series with the same lineup as their previous appearances, but missing second baseman Johnny Evers due to injury. Connie Mack and the Philadelphia Athletics making their second appearance in the World Series, and first since 1905, ending the Detroit Tigers' 3-year reign at the top of the American League. Game 1 of the series starts in Philadelphia at the Athletics' brand new Shibe Park and features the pitching matchup of Orville Overall for the Cubs versus Chief Bender for the A's. The Athletics took the series' first lead in the second inning. Third baseman Frank Baker led off with a ground rule double, of which there will be many in the series. Harry Davis laid down a bunt to move Baker to third, and a single by Danny Murphy brought home the run to make it 1-0 Athletics. Danny Murphy proceeded to steal second base and took third on a groundout by Jack Barry before Ira Thomas drew a walk. A's pitcher Chief Bender looped a single into center field to drive home Murphy and make the score 2-0 Athletics. More action in the third from the A's when Briss Lord led off with a ground rule double and took third base on a sacrifice bunt by Eddie Collins. Frank Baker brought home Lord for the third run on a base hit to make the score 3-0 A's. Overall struck out the next batter, and Baker was caught stealing to end the inning without any further run scoring. Harry McIntyre replaced Orville Overall on the mound for the Cubs in the fourth inning and managed to hold the A's to one hit in the eighth inning, but this did lead to the scoring of another run. With 2 outs, Eddie Collins drew a walk. The runner was picked off at first base, but a throwing error by McIntyre allowed Collins to scramble to third. Frank Baker came through with his second ground rule double of the game to drive in Collins and make the score 4-0 A's. The Cubs managed to spoil a shutout in the top of the ninth. Joe Tinker nearly made an out on a pop foul, but catcher Ira Thomas made an error on the play to keep Tinker alive at the plate. Joe Tinker made good on his second chance with a base hit and took second on an error by outfielder Amos Strunk. After taking advantage of the 2 Tigers' errors in the inning, Tinker was able to score on a base hit by catcher Johnny Kling to make the score 4-1 Philadelphia. The Cubs, however, left 2 runners on base, and 4-1 ended up the final score. Charles Chief Bender pitching a 3-hitter for the A's with 8 strikeouts and only 2 walks, with only 1 unearned run in a command performance. The Philadelphia Athletics take the lead in the series after Game 1. Game 2 of the 1910 World Series between the Chicago Cubs and the Philadelphia Athletics. With Connie Mack and the A's leading the series 1-0, we move on to Game 2 at Shibe Park in Philadelphia with the pitching matchup of Mordecai Three-Finger Brown for the Cubs and Jack Combs for the Athletics. The Cubs got things rolling in the top of the first. Leadoff batter Jimmy Sheckard walked and then was erased at second base when Frank Schulte grounded into a force out. Solly Hoffman took a walk as well to put 2 runners on for Frank Chance. Chance connected for another hit to load the bases, and second baseman Heine Zimmerman put a sac fly in the air to drive in Schulte and make the score 1-0 Cubs. The Athletics got on board in the third inning. Ira Thomas reached on an error by Harry Steinfeld. Then, after Jack Combs struck out, Amos Strunk got on as well with a bunt single. Briss Lord grounded it into a force at second and moved Thomas to third to put runners on the corners with 2 outs. Both base runners came home on a double by Eddie Collins into left field to make the score 2-1 Philly. Jack Combs made 2 defensive errors and walked a batter in the 5th inning, but managed to coax a double play, and no one scored in the Cubs half. In the Athletics half of the 5th, Briss Lord got on with a base hit and was forced out at second on a grounder by Eddie Collins. With 2 outs, Eddie Collins stole second and Frank Baker drew a walk. Harry Davis drove in a run with a single to score Collins and make the tally 3-1 Athletics. The 7th inning was eventful in both halves. In the top of the inning, the Cubs' Jimmy Sheckard got on with a ground rule double with 1 out. After Frank Schulte made the second out on a fly ball and Solly Hoffman took a walk, Frank Chance delivered a single to drive in Sheckard, putting the score at 3-2. The Athletics half of the 7th began with a walk to Eddie Collins. Frank Baker hit a single to put runners on the corners, and a ground rule double by Harry Davis drove in Collins and moved Baker to third base. Both base runners came home on another double, this time by Danny Murphy to make the score 6-2 Philadelphia. Jack Barry moved Murphy to third base with a sacrifice bunt, and Danny Murphy scored on a base hit by Ira Thomas. Mordecai Brown got his fellow pitcher Jack Combs to ground out, putting runners on first and second with 2 outs. Amos Strunk came through with the third double of the inning to score Thomas, making it 8-2 Athletics. The inning nearly ended on a fly ball by Briss Lord, but an error by left fielder Jimmy Sheckard allowed Lord to reach first safely and Amos Strunk to come across the plate to make the score at 9-2 Philly. The Cubs pitching continuing to have a tough time with the Athletics batting order. Mordecai Brown was pulled for reliever Lou Ritchie after a pinch hitter in the 8th. The Cubs made some noise in the top of the 9th when Solly Hoffman got on base with a single. Hoffman moved to second on a groundout by Frank Chance, and then a ground rule double by Heine Zimmerman brought in Hoffman to make the final score 9-3 Athletics. Jack Combs with a somewhat erratic performance, giving up 8 hits and walking 9 batters, but only 3 Cubs base runners crossed the plate. The Philadelphia Athletics lead the series 2-0 as we head to Chicago for Game 3. Game 3 of the 1910 World Series between the Philadelphia Athletics and the Chicago Cubs. With the Athletics leading the series 2-0, we move to the West Side grounds, home of the Chicago Cubs, for the third game. On the mound for the Athletics, Jack Combs gets his second consecutive start after 2 days rest and a win in Game 2 and faces Ed Rulebach for the Cubs. Scoring began for both teams in the first inning. In the top half, the Athletics' Amos Strunk got on base with a walk and moved to second on a sacrifice bunt by Briss Lord. After Eddie Collins made the second out on a fly ball, Strunk came home on a single by Frank Baker to make the score 1-0 A's. Baker was caught stealing to end the top of the first. In the Cubs half, Jimmy Sheckard led off with a walk, and a ground rule double by Frank Schulte put runners at second and third. Solly Hoffman lofted a sac fly to score Sheckard and tie the game up at 1 run apiece. Scoring continued for both teams in the second inning. For the Athletics, Harry Davis led off with a walk and took second as Danny Murphy grounded out. Jack Berry hit the first ground rule double at the West Side grounds for the series to score Davis, and then a second ground rule double in the inning, this time by Jack Combs, scored Berry to make the score 3-1 A's. In the Cubs half of the second, Joe Tinker got on base with 1 out on a double to right field. Tinker moved to third when Johnny Kling grounded out. After pitching only 2 innings, Ed Rulebach was pulled for pinch hitter Ginger Beaumont, who played in the very first World Series with the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1903. Beaumont and the next batter, Jimmy Sheckard, drew 2 consecutive walks to load the bases. Wildfire Frank Schulte came through with the third ground rule double of the game to score both Tinker and Beaumont and tie the game up at 3 runs. In the third inning, Harry McIntyre relieved Ed Rulebach on the mound for the Cubs. After getting the first batter out, McIntyre gave up an infield single to Eddie Collins, followed by a triple by Frank Baker to score 1 run. The next batter, Harry Davis, was hit by a pitch, and Danny Murphy then connected for a 3-run home run to put the score at 7-3 Athletics. Apparently the distance of the shot was in question, and Cubs manager Frank Chance was ejected for arguing with the umpire. Chance was replaced at first base by Jimmy Archer, and Jack Feister was brought in to relieve McIntyre after recording only 1 out. Jack Berry continued the rally with another ground rule double, and then scored with some assistance by a throwing error from the Cubs shortstop Joe Tinker on an Ira Thomas ground ball. Jack Combs hit into a double play to end the rally with a score of 8-3 Athletics. Both offenses quieted down until the 7th inning. In the bottom of the 7th, the Athletics made 2 outs on contact before Frank Baker reached safely on an error by third baseman Harry Steinfeld. Harry Davis and Danny Murphy followed with a pair of singles to load the bases. Jack Berry then connected for a single to score Baker and Davis, and the base runners Murphy and Berry ended up at second and third on the throw home. Catcher Ira Thomas drew a walk to load the bases again, and another bases-loaded single, this time by Jack Combs, scored 2 more of the runners to make the score 12-3 Athletics. Despite the major deficit, the Cubs made a little more noise in the 8th. Jimmy Sheckard got on board with a walk. Frank Schulte made the first out on a fly ball, and then Solly Hoffman connected for a base hit, on which the runners ended up on second and third on the throw to third base. Jimmy Archer went down on strikes, which brought up Heine Zimmerman to the plate. Jack Combs lost control of a pitch and went wild, which scored both Sheckard and Hoffman. The final score of the game was 12-5 Athletics, in a wild one in which the Cubs pitching was absolutely abused. The Cubs are on the brink of defeat as we head to Game 4 with the Athletics up in the series 3-0. Game 4 of the 1910 World Series between the Philadelphia Athletics and the Chicago Cubs. With the Athletics leading the series 3-0 and the Cubs on the brink of elimination, the 4th game was played in the West Side grounds in Chicago with the pitching matchup of Chief Bender for the Athletics and King Cole for the Cubs. The Cubs put a quick lead on the board in the first inning. Jimmy Sheckard led off with a walk. The next batter, Frank Schulte, struck out, and Jimmy Sheckard stole second on the same play. Solly Hoffman looped a single into left field, and Sheckard scored the first run of the game. Frank Chance followed by hitting into a double play featuring some runner interference to end the inning. The score is 1-0 Cubs. The Athletics made 2 outs on ground balls to start the third inning. Chief Bender drew a walk and came home on a triple by Amos Strunk. Strunk attempted to stretch the hit into an inside-the-park home run, but was thrown out at the plate to end the rally and the inning with a score of 1-1. In the Athletics half of the 4th, Eddie Collins got on base with a single after the first batter struck out. A ground rule double by Frank Baker put runners on second and third when Harry Davis whiffed for the second out. Danny Murphy fired off another ground rule double to score both base runners and put the Athletics in the lead 3-1. Jack Berry was Cole's third strikeout victim to end the inning. In the bottom of the same frame, the Cubs retaliated with 3 consecutive base hits. Frank Schulte led off with a knock to left field, followed by a single to right by Solly Hoffman to put runners on the corners. Frank Chance delivered base hit number 3 to score Frank Schulte and move Hoffman to second. Momentum was stalled when Heine Zimmerman hit into a ground ball double play for the first 2 outs, leaving only Frank Chance at second. Bender got Harry Steinfeld to fly out to end the inning. The score is 3-2 Athletics. The Cubs pinch hit for pitcher King Cole in the 8th inning, and Mordecai Three-Finger Brown came on in relief in the 9th. Brown made an error on a pop fly in the A's half of the inning, but no runs scored and no harm was done. In the bottom of the 9th, Frank Schulte got in scoring position immediately with a double and advanced to third on a sacrifice bunt by Solly Hoffman. Frank Chance tied the game up for the Cubs with a triple to score the runner. 2 consecutive infield pop-ups ended regulation play with a score of 3-3 and were headed into extra innings. The Athletics threatened in the top of the 10th when Harry Davis got on base with a one-out double. Davis was cut off at third when Danny Murphy grounded it into a fielder's choice and Jack Berry struck out to end the threat. In the bottom of the 10th, Joe Tinker popped up for the first out to start the frame. Catcher Jimmy Archer, who was starting in place of Johnny Kling because the Cubs believed the Athletics had his signs figured out, paid off with a ground rule double to put the winning run on second. A ground ball by Mordecai Brown pushed the runner to third base and brought up Jimmy Sheckard. Sheckard played the hero for the Cubs with a walk-off single to drive in Archer for a final score of 4-3 Cubs. Strong outings from both starting pitchers, Bender and Cole, while Mordecai Brown was excellent in relief, pitching 2 innings and only giving up 1 hit, as the Cubs stave off elimination in 10 innings and force a 5th game, with the Athletics leading the series 3-1. Game 5 of the 1910 World Series between the Philadelphia Athletics and the Chicago Cubs. The Athletics lead the series 3-1 and make their second attempt to wrap up the championship at the West Side Grounds in Chicago. The 5th game featured starting pitchers Jack Combs making his 3rd start for the Athletics and Mordecai Brown for the Cubs. The Athletics' Connie Mack made a few alterations to the starting lineup for the game, including shifting Briss Lord to center and bringing in Topsy Hartzell to play left, while Jack Lapp got the start behind the plate. The altered batting order paid off when Topsy Hartzell led off the game with a base hit. Hartzell stole second after Briss Lord struck out and came home on a single by Eddie Collins to make the score 1-0 Philadelphia. Frank Chance began the Cubs half of the second inning with a ground rule double. Heine Zimmerman laid down a sac bunt to move Chance to third, and Harry Steinfeld lined a single through the gap into left to score Frank Chance and tie the game at 1-1. In the 5th inning, Danny Murphy reached safely on an error by Cubs third baseman Harry Steinfeld and advanced to second on a sac bunt by Jack Berry. Jack Lapp followed with a base hit to drive in Murphy for an unearned run and put the Athletics in the lead at 2-1. Both teams failed to score any runs until the 8th inning, when the Athletics offense broke out with a major rally. Pitcher Jack Combs led off with a base hit and then was forced out at second on a grounder to short by Topsy Hartzell. Hartzell stole second base to retake scoring position and then came home on a double by Briss Lord. Eddie Collins followed with another double to drive in Lord, making the score 4-1 A's. Collins stole third base and then broke for home on a ground ball by Frank Baker, but was nailed at the plate for the second out of the inning, leaving Frank Baker on first. Mordecai Brown issued his first walk of the game to Harry Davis to put a second runner on. Danny Murphy then smashed a base hit, which scored Baker. Heine Zimmerman's throw to the plate went wild for an error, and Harry Davis scored as well, leaving Murphy at third. Perhaps rattled by the rally, Mordecai Brown uncorked a wild pitch, which scored Murphy, and then walked the next batter before getting Jack Lapp to ground out to end the inning. But the damage was already done, and the A's led the game 7-1. With the Cubs' chances of survival not looking good, they fought back in the bottom of the 8th when Jimmy Sheckard led off with a double. Frank Shelty grounded to short, and Sheckard took third, and then scored on a single by Frank Chance after the next batter struck out, to make the final score 7-2 Athletics. The Philadelphia Athletics win the 1910 World Series 4-1 for their first ever championship. Jack Combs with 3 wins in the series on all 3 of his starts on the mound. The Athletics offense especially potent, with both Eddie Collins and Frank Baker hitting over 400 as we put a lid on the Chicago Cubs dynasty and enter an era of dominance by Connie Mack and the Philadelphia Athletics.